You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. Manitoba Opera breaks new ground in their production Li Keur, Riel's Heart of the North. The first full-scale Indigenous-led opera to take place on a Canadian main stage opens on Saturday at the Centennial Concert Hall. And to hear more about it, I'm joined by Evan Korbut, who sings the title role of Louis Riel, in addition to Robideau, and Julie Lumsden, who performs as Rose and Marguerite. Hello to you both.
Hi, Simon.
Hello.
Julie, it's great to have you back in studio. Evan, it's wonderful to welcome you here for the first time.
It's wonderful to be here.
So you're a Toronto-based Anishanaabe baritone, originally from Sault Ste. Marie and Garden River, which is part of Robinson Treaty, Crown Treaty 60. Have you been here to Winnipeg, to Treaty 1 before?
So I was here in the summer to take part in the workshop that we did. You weren't there. It was just me. But that was my first time here in Winnipeg, and I have to say it's quite nice to be here also in the winter to see, what all the fuss is about when they call it winter peg. I'm like, oh yeah, within 3 days it started snowing, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, you got the full welcome then.
I did.
Glad we could roll out the white welcome mat for you. Now, I do want to talk a lot about. There's a lot of things to unpack in the lead up to this big production. Of course, the role you're singing aside, and we will get to that in just a bit. I just want to begin by asking, being here as part of this historic production, taking place not all too far from where the first treaty between the Crown and members of the Anishinaabe and Cree Nations was signed back in 1871. That in and of itself is just a very special act. Can you tell us more just about how you're feeling in the lead up to this opera?
Right. So I'm feeling good. It's difficult for me because, and not to cut too close to the heart of the issue, but I'm not Métis myself. And so coming in from a different Indigenous perspective is challenging. And I want to make sure that I'm treating the process with respect and that I'm thinking it through clearly and that I'm making sure that I do it justice in a way that doesn't detract from the character. And so I am excited. A little trepidatious, I think, is probably the best way to put it.
Julie, what about you as someone who grew up here and as a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation? What's it like getting that call from Manitoba Opera and the lead up to this production?
It's pretty exciting. I've never done a full-fledged opera before, and so to have my first experience, especially on the main stage with Manitoba Opera, being an Indigenous-led opera, having 5 languages on stage with us. We're singing in Southern Michif, in French Michif, there's Anishinaabe Moan, there's French, there's English. Having that be the main focus of the opera and have it being a new work, something that people have never heard before, getting to put our own stamp on it is so exciting for me. For this being my first time in opera, it feels like a gift of gifts of gifts of gifts. It's just very exciting to be able to hear this music with these words representing this story on stage.
Now, you've both been at the cutting edge of opera and Western art music in the 21st century. Julie, we've had you on before to talk about this. You're a Juno nominee for your work with Against the Grain and their production of Messiah Complex, this incredible Canadian reimagining of the grand Handel work that honored and gave support to Indigenous and underrepresented voices from coast to coast to coast. Evan, I was reading through your bio, and you were a part of the world premiere of the opera adaptation of The Ecstasy of Rita Joe. You're a Dora Award winner for your role in Shauna Didit, a Dean Bury work, in addition to others. You're both former residents at the Banff Centre for Creativity and Arts, and you've clearly both spent a lot of time thinking and performing and working in this medium of opera. So I guess we've sort of alluded to this already, but let me cut right to the chase and be very blunt. How big of a deal is this opera?
It's huge. I would say it's monumental. I have done And I think you sort of, when you made the introduction initially, really hit it on the head. It is Indigenous-led, and that is something that many of the previous performances were not. Usually the cast would be largely Indigenous, but often the creative team were not. And so having that strong sense of support and community in the artistic process is incredibly valuable, and I would say it's a huge deal. I'm incredibly excited to put this up.
Julie, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. Coming from a background of more kind of plays and musicals and working in Indigenous plays and Indigenous theater, it's been similarly the same experience. Something that, the cast is mostly Indigenous, and then we usually don't have that reflected upon the creative team. And this has been instilled on every single level. We are having there was beadwork commissioned. And instead of having actual beadwork on stage, there are photos of the beadwork that has been commissioned for this exact performance, for this production. It's just instilled in every level, from the design to the composition, to having 2 fiddlers and a guitar player on stage, to the choreography, to the actors, to the costume design. It's a part of every single layer, and I think that's what makes it so authentic to our experience.
All right, so let's break down this opera a little bit more. A bit of backstory. An opera penned by Dr. Suzanne M. Steele. It is being billed as a historical mystic opera, which has the characters traveling back in time, encountering their ancestors, and ultimately trying to salvage a nation while saving themselves from total destruction in the burning heart of the continent of the 1870s. That's straight from the Manitoba Opera website. Pretty gripping stuff.
It is, yes.
So, Evan, let me ask you, you're performing the title role of Louis Riel, considered, of course, the founder and the father of Manitoba. How is he portrayed in Li Keur?
So it's interesting because right at the beginning, Josephine Marie, she will say, some of these things are true, some of these things might be true, and some of them could be true. And I think that reflects a lot of how we look back at Louis Riel, because a lot of the things that we consider as facts may be certainly massaged a certain way or may have a certain historical bias. And I think that it's interesting that in this, he's not looked upon as some sort of iconoclast. He's not looked upon as any sort of mythic figure. In fact, not to spoil things, but that is undercut. That perception is undercut right at the beginning of the show. And there's a lot of room for humanity and a lot of room for vulnerability that you would not normally see. And I hope that as I portray this amazing historical figure, that I am able to bring a humanity to it that people can really connect to. And I think that's really the core of how he's portrayed in the show. He's a guy. He's a guy. He was just a human being like all of us.
Can you tell us about how the other person you're portraying factors into your role, the role of Robideau?
Yes. So the role of Robideau is, I would say, a bit more wild. He spends a lot of time connecting with nature, and it isn't made clear in the show necessarily that Robideau and Riel are one and the same. That is a conclusion you could draw. But it is definitely someone who, if he were to be Riel, and if that is how you were going to look at it, he's a younger, wilder, more charismatic version who's able to let himself go a bit. He's not as tied in by his own personal beliefs or hasn't solidified them yet. And so in that way, in the way that Riel may be portrayed as more human, a younger version of said human, I would say Robideau is portrayed that way.
Oh, very, very interesting. Julie, what about you? Who are Rose and Marguerite?
So Rose is a friend of one of the pivotal characters, Josette. She has a nice little aids to the drama of that arc. And then in Act 2, I come in as Marguerite, who is Riel's wife and the mother of his children. And I think similarly to what Evan said, I think we see the pictures of Louis and Marguerite and their children, and it's very stilted and it feels very, historical. And so to be able to bring to light their love and their family at a time, before a lot of destruction came upon them, it feels very humanizing.
Very, very special indeed. If you're just tuning in, my name is Simon Rusnak, and you're listening to a conversation with Evan Korbut and Julie Lumsden, who are part of the upcoming Manitoba Opera production, Li Keur. Now, we've already talked about this. Julie, you so beautifully summed it all up when I asked you about what it's like being a part of this production. But a cross-cultural collaboration that brings together 11 vocal soloists, an adult and children's chorus, fiddlers and dancers. I think all told it's about 70 people on stage, plus the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. This is a big production, and it is being presented in spoken and sung text in 5 different languages. We know as singers that coachings in French and English are common, but I'm curious about what it's been like singing and speaking in Michif and French Michif and Anishanaabe, the Ojibwe language, that aren't typically heard in opera. What's that process been like, Julie?
It's been so beautiful from the get-go. I started with this project in 2018. We did a workshop in the summer, and it was a very different kind of framework for the music that we had, and it had this wonderful journey since then. But from the get-go, we've been working with language keepers and elders who've come in and helped us learn the language, really kind of get it within our bodies and our mouths, and then also sing it. As we know, you're speaking French and you're singing French. It's a very different thing, especially in the operatic world. And so we've had to do the same with these languages of figuring out how can I best, get this language out in a way that helps my singing voice on this note. And we had a day where we had, I think, 4 different rooms happening at Westworth United Church with all the language keepers during our rehearsal process this time. And it was about a 4-hour chunk, and we were able to go from room to room if we needed to speak, French Michif or Heritage Michif, or if we needed to go and brush up on our Anishanaabe Moan. And we had these elders and language keepers come in and just really help us get these sounds and this language into our bodies. And it's been such a wonderful, wonderful gift getting to have these relationships with these elders throughout the process. A lot of them were with us in 2018 and have come back, and now they get to see the show on the stage with the surtitles, everyone hearing this language for the first time on this production. It's just very exciting to be able to give that gift back to them.
I think what also is just so clear in this conversation is just how many communities are coming together to make this happen. Evan, what's that been like for you to be a part of this community and welcome so many others to make Li Keur happen?
Well, speaking from a strictly personal perspective, I would say that it is incredibly gratifying to be able to walk on stage. And there's a couple of times where there's a simulated party going on, like a kitchen party or some sort of gathering, and seeing so many people who look like me. I'm like, I have not experienced that on a stage before. And I'm always blown away by the fact that I'm like, yeah, this was what it would be like to go walk around in Garden River. I'm like, yep, that's it. And having that sense of community and having that really dense concentration of so many of us, it's a gift. And to go back to what you were saying about the language keepers, what's really interesting about it is that, as in any community, there are so many different perspectives and viewpoints. And what really struck me is that when we were approaching the language, there's not a standardized orthography for a lot of these languages. And so, you would definitely have a couple of the language keepers be like, you could say it this way, but my grandma used to say it this way. And then someone else would say, oh, that's right. I think I remember hearing that, but also my aunt said it this way. They're all correct. And that's what's so magical about it. It's not like there's a standardized Parisian French version of Michif and, no received pronunciation. And so it's very interesting to be able to work towards a consensus on that. And that's been the most amazing thing, to see it come to life and see each of the literal voices of the community have a say in how it's constructed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one thing we haven't yet talked about is the music itself, co-composed by the traditional fiddler Alex Kusterok and composer Neil Weisensell, who also leads this production on the podium, leading the WSO and all of y'all. How would you characterize this music? Who wants to go for it?
Well, I will go first. It is a new opera. Like, for me, it feels new. There's a lot of things that are more challenging to me than a Mozart opera. There's a lot of things that took a while to get into my ear, but there's also a lot of tunes. Me and Evan sing a beautiful duet that gets stuck in my head every single day. And it's just, I think there's a lot of music for everybody. We heard it for the first time with the symphony yesterday, and to be able to hear the orchestration that Neil has figured out mixed in with Alex's fiddling, it is just such a wonderful amalgamation of these two sections of art, these two sections of music, I think, that comes together in this really beautiful way, like the Michif culture.
Mm-hmm. Evan, anything to
add? Yeah, so... sorry, can I hear the question again?
Well, no, we were just talking about the music and how this is really sort of, I mean, as Julie was just talking about, this idea of Western art music. I mean, like, opera is about as quintessential as it gets in terms of European tradition, pairing with traditional elements, and how this has all come together to be realized in Li Keur.
Okay, I would definitely say that probably the word that I would use to describe that is accessibility. It's so accessible. You hear the fiddle tunes, you hear, like, and even within the composed music itself that Neil did, it's just, I would say it's very accessible. You look at it on the page and you think, how's this going to sound? And then you hear it as it all comes together, and you're like, oh, of course, that's totally relatable. And you would hear a lot of it, going to a kitchen party. You're like, oh yeah, there's somebody old granddad pulls out his fiddle, and you're like, there you go. And that's what it sounds like. And I think that's it's very welcoming in that way. But it also contains aspects of the new music. So sometimes you'll hear stuff, and you're like, that's definitely new to my ear. And I think that having that broad spectrum makes it like a very what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like it's everything all at once. It's a mix.
Like all
a charcuterie board.
Yeah, a charcuterie board of music. I was going to say all-encompassing, but I like charcuterie more.
Yeah, it is a charcuterie board of music, and that's
with some bannock on it.
Yeah. And that's true of just like the multidisciplinary aspect of it as well. Just the dancers, the fiddlers, and all that stuff. It's everything. It's kind of a little bit of everything, and that's that's what a community is. And I think that it's reflected also in the musical presentation as well.
So just before I let you both go, we started this conversation off a little bit more on a personal note on what it means to be a part of this production. And Julie, I was just reading your bio, and you end by dedicating your performance to your grandfathers, Alden and Charles, who gave you the gifts of song and community. Can you tell us more about those very special gifts and what it means to do exactly that with Manitoba Opera?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've been taught by my mentors that, our art is our activism, and to be able to be on stage proudly as a Métis person and as a Métis artist singing these songs and, embodying Margaret Riel, it's something that I know that my grandfather Charles would have been so proud to have seen. He is our Métis patriarch in our family and did a lot of that work for us in identifying that and welcoming that and being very, very proud of that fact. And my grandpa Alden was actually a radio host.
Oh, no way.
And became a Juno nominee for his comedy album called Fight On Manitoba, which is played a lot when we have big blizzards here. And so Alden was someone who loved to sing and gave me the gift of song. And I know that this is a wonderful amalgamation of both of my grandfathers and what they represented in my life coming together at a stage at home, and both my grandmas will be able to come and see it. So I'm very, very proud of that.
Oh, yeah, as you should be. And what about you, Evan? I'm sure there's a lot of people who've helped you get to where you're at. Are there any particular individuals that you're sort of reflecting on in the lead up to this performance?
Yes, I would say my grandmother first and foremost, Patricia. She passed away in 2018, but she was definitely my biggest fan. So she would keep clippings of all of my performances, and she'd come see everything. And she would sometimes take out like articles in the newspaper back home in Sault Ste. Marie and be like, "Oh, my son's in this," and and I definitely would not be here today were it not for her support. I started as a violinist when I was 4 years old, and she would take me out to my violin lessons, and just she always fostered that gift of musicality in me, and just I would not be doing what I am doing were it not for her. And I would say for her and for my community back in Garden River, I was sort of displaced from that community early on in my life, and I'm slowly working my way back, and I'm hoping that being more in touch with the culture and learning more and building my own community will help me sort of reconnect, and that's what this journey's been for me. It's been a journey of reconnecting, and I think that that's incredibly valuable, not just for the relationships that exist in my past, but the ones that might come in the future.
Well, thank you both for being here, making everybody proud. Very excited about this production. It is not every day that a work of this magnitude takes place in Winnipeg, let alone on the Canadian stage. I'm thrilled that you've taken the time to join me here in the Classic 107 studio today. Li Keur, Riel's Heart of the North, opens Saturday, November 18th with additional performances on Wednesday, November 22nd and Friday, November 24th. Julie, Evan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Simon.